All right, buckle up. We are launching into an in-depth examination of the sources surrounding Christopher Nolan's 2008 sequel, The Dark Knight.
And this isn't just any sequel. This is really the film that, redefined the ceiling of the entire superhero genre.
It forced Hollywood to completely rethink what a comic book adaptation could achieve.
Exactly. Our objective today is to really extract and synthesize the core insights for you. We're talking the granular details of the film's complex themes, its groundbreaking production, and, of course, the massive cultural legacy it left behind.
We want to go beyond the surface to understand why this movie hit so hard, why it changed mainstream cinema.
So the film opens in Gotham City. There's this fragile post-Batman Begins order that's been established.
And the core premise is built around what the sources call the three-man alliance.
Right, you have the vigilante Batman, Police Lieutenant James Gordon, and then the District Attorney Harvey Dent.
And they have a legitimate strategy. They're working to dismantle the city's organized crime infrastructure from within the system and from outside of it.
It's an order that's really built on an assumption, though. The assumption that a singular, coordinated effort can solve these huge systemic issues.
But their efforts are, well, swiftly and violently derailed.
By the introduction of the Joker, he's an anarchist mastermind, but his purpose isn't wealth or power or, territorial control.
No, it's entirely ideological. He exists solely to test the moral limitations, the ethical breaking points of the city's heroes.
He is chaos attempting to corrupt order. That's his entire function.
And the creative foundation for this huge shift, it begins almost immediately after the success of Batman Begins.
Warner Bros. Prioritized a sequel right away. And Christopher Nolan, who had actually never directed a sequel before, he got together with co-writer David S. Goyer.
And they developed the initial story with one singular concept driving them.
That concept was escalation. They wanted to continue the prior film's commitment to a heightened sense of realism.
Pushing the genre into a new, grounded space where consequences are real, where actions breed reactions.
Okay, so let's get straight into that philosophical core, the blueprint of the film. Can you elaborate on how Nolan and Goyer really defined this theme of escalation? Because it's so much more than just, the Joker showing up.
It really is. It was the fundamental belief of the writers that Batman's extraordinary efforts to fight common crime, a vigilante operating completely outside the legal framework
Right.
that would inevitably lead to an opposing and far greater escalation from the criminal element.
And the Joker is the physical and philosophical manifestation of that counter-escalation. He uses terrorism, psychological warfare, as his weapon against the city's moral fabric.
And they signaled this. This impending doom was telegraphed from the very end of Batman Begins.
The sources confirm that. The inclusion of the Joker playing card in the finale of the first film was an absolutely deliberate message.
It was meant to convey the falsehood of Batman's core belief. This idea that his war on crime would ever be temporary.
Or solvable, or something he could just retire from.
He had unleashed an inevitable cyclical conflict.
And despite the very real-world resonance, the post-9/11 parallels, Goyer and Nolan were careful.
They didn't want to make overt political statements about specific events, right? Like the war on terror.
Exactly. They felt that too much specificity would just detract from the universality of the story.
But their goal was still for the narrative to resonate, to reflect the contemporary audience's fears.
Specifically that pervasive fear of anarchy, the fear of an unknown existential threat, the breakdown of civil order itself.
And that desire for realism led to a pretty dramatic shift in genre, too.
It did. Christopher and his brother Jonathan Nolan, who crafted the final script, they moved away from a typical superhero film structure completely.
They molded the narrative to look much more like a classical crime drama.
Yeah, they cited legendary films like Michael Mann's Heat and Coppola's The Godfather as really clear influences on the script and the overall tone.
And that framework, that specific crime drama framework, allowed the film to operate on a more sophisticated level.
It made it fundamentally about the ethical compromises. The compromises inherent in law enforcement, in political idealism, and of course, in vigilantism.
And at the center of that intricate structure, the sources identify Harvey Dent as the film's true dramatic centerpiece.
He's the character who serves as the dramatic ground zero of the whole battle between Batman's order and the Joker's chaos.
That's fascinating, that the sources identify Dent as the true protagonist. But isn't that a huge risk? You're essentially sidelining your main character.
You are. Batman, as we noted, was intentionally written as generally static. You're sacrificing his narrative development for a supporting role.
And yet it paid off. Christopher Nolan himself confirmed that the title, The Dark Knight, refers to Dent just as much as it does to Batman.
Dent, Gotham's idealistic DA, has a duality that's similar to Bruce Wayne's. That made him narratively necessary. His downfall is the engine of the entire plot.
He's the symbol of what they're fighting for.
And what they have to lose.
We absolutely have to discuss the decision regarding the Joker's background. Or the lack of one. The non-origin story.
Yes. Nolan and Goyer made a very conscious choice not to give him a, quote, cliché origin story or any kind of traditional narrative arc.
This was a strategic move, wasn't it? To preserve his threat.
Completely. They wanted him to be an unknowable, already formed threat. They compared him directly to the pure, predatory force of the shark in Jaws.
And the lack of an explanation. The fact that his stories about his scars are all lies. That's what makes him terrifying.
You can't reason with him. You can't appeal to him. He is the purest distillation of motiveless terror.
I was really surprised to see the sources emphasize that. The filmmakers desired to avoid undermining the villain. They felt it happened in other films that explored the origins of villains like Hannibal Lecter or Darth Vader.
Exactly. That intentional ambiguity makes the Joker fundamentally scarier. It allowed the film to focus purely on the rise of the Joker as this chaotic, existing force. He just is.
And that brings us to the cast, where that commitment to raw, grounded realism really solidified the film's place in history.
Starting with Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne.
Right. Bale described his character's evolution from Batman Begins as transforming from a young, angry man looking for a purpose.
Into a hero who's now burdened by the crushing realization that this war he started against crime is seemingly endless.
And maybe unwinnable.
It's a very heavy mantle. And as we said, the dramatic weight was on Dent's moral downfall. So Bruce Wayne himself was written as a generally static character.
The focus wasn't on his personal growth.
No, it was on his reaction to the chaos, the constant ethical compromises he was forced to make.
But on a technical level, the film dramatically improved the portrayal of Batman.
Absolutely. The filmmakers improved the Batsuit design. The first one had been criticized for restricting movement.
The new costume was designed to be much more agile. It allowed the crew to showcase more of his Kesey fighting method training.
And that Kesey style is so crucial to the tone. For you listen if you don't know, Kesey is an aggressive, instinctual self-defense system. It emphasizes these brutal counterattacks using the head, elbows, forearms.
It provides a perfect visual contrast to the combat in Batman Begins, which was sometimes a little obscured or frantic.
This made Batman's violence feel grounded, heavy, and reactive.
Now, let's get to the defining performance, the one that altered the trajectory of the entire production. Heath Ledger as the Joker.
His casting in August 2006 was initially met with some heavy public criticism.
Some fans really doubted his ability to follow Jack Nicholson's iconic portrayal.
Yet Ledger and Nolan shared very similar ideas about the character's realistic interpretation. And Ledger embraced the challenge with this extraordinary intensity.
He described his version as a psychopathic, mass-murdering, schizophrenic clown with zero empathy.
And he consciously avoided any attempts to humanize him to explain his actions. He was reportedly influenced by the nihilism of Alex from A Clockwork Orange.
And the erratic, destructive energy of British musicians like Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten.
That preparation was incredibly intense. Ledger famously spent about a month alone in a hotel room, reading relevant comic books and developing the physical language of the character.
It's fascinating, the detail that he developed the character's voice by mixing a high pitch and a low pitch. He drew inspiration from the vocal shifts used in ventriloquist performances.
And his combat style was intentionally improvised. It was erratic, reflecting the character's profound mental instability.
That improvisation was key. His fighting wasn't supposed to look polished or trained like Batman's.
No, it was meant to look like pure, unpredictable, dangerous reaction. He also spent months creating a detailed Joker diary, filling it with photos, images, and these dark, resonating elements that spoke to the character's disturbed psyche.
And here's a specific detail that really highlights the character's twisted moral compass. The sources note that Ledger included notes in this diary about finding the disease AIDS humorous.
It just shows that absolute lack of empathy. He later described the role as the most fun he'd ever had, but he did confess it was an exhausting process, both physically and mentally.
There are several striking anecdotes from the set that demonstrate the intensity of his commitment.
Consider Michael Caine, a cinema legend. He was working on a scene with one of the Joker's video transmissions.
And Kane shared that he was so stunned by the immediacy and the raw power of Ledger's performance.
He actually forgot his lines completely.
That's an incredible insight into the raw power Ledger was channeling.
Another often cited anecdote, Ledger even asked Christian Bale to physically hit him during the interrogation scene to increase the realism.
Bale declined, but Ledger, driven by his commitment, just started throwing himself around the set. He cracked and dented the walls to achieve that violent, desperate energy.
It is with deep sympathy and respect that we must acknowledge the tragic loss of Heath Ledger. He died from an accidental prescription drug overdose in January 2008 before the film's theatrical release.
And the public interest in his final defining performance only grew after his passing, creating this immense anticipation for the film.
Christopher Nolan made the very difficult decision not to modify the Joker's narrative in response.
He noted that since he preferred to capture sound live, Ledger had completed all his performance work, the voice, the physicality before his passing.
So the final film truly honors the totality of his vision. Nolan described editing the film after the actor passed, having to look at him and hear his voice every day as tremendously emotional.
But he found comfort and a professional duty in finishing the performance that Ledger had entrusted to him, making sure his work was presented exactly as intended.
Moving to Aaron Eckhart's role as Harvey Dent, Nolan was looking for an actor with a traditional American heroic presence, but one who also carried that necessary undercurrent of anger or darkness.
And Eckhart found portraying conflicted characters fascinating. He noted that Dent differs from Batman only in the distance he's willing to go for his cause.
One operates within the law, one outside of it, but both are driven to a kind of extremism.
Eckhart's preparation for Dent was deeply influenced by real-world political idealism. He looked specifically at the Kennedy family.
Particularly Robert F. Kennedy, who fought organized crime with this idealistic view of the law, believing in the power of the system.
Dent starts with that same unquestioning faith in the legal system. He wants to allow Batman to retire.
But he feels constrained by its limits. And this friction is what leads him to support Batman's vigilantism, that willingness to operate outside the law to achieve justice.
The physical transformation into Two-Face was also key to maintaining the firm's gritty realism.
Eckhart and Nolan consciously ignored the overly colorful and cartoonish portrayal from Batman Forever.
They opted for a grounded look, a neutral-toned suit, slightly burnt, and a complex facial design that was horrific, but still anatomically plausible.
They rejected early designs that were deemed too conventionally monstrous.
And finally, the indispensable supporting anchors that ground all this chaos.
Gary Oldman, as Lieutenant and eventually Commissioner James Gordon, provided the film's moral center.
He's portrayed as this honest, incorruptible character who's constantly struggling with the limitations of his own morality and his institutional authority.
He is the necessary, unwavering anchor in the storm.
And Maggie Gyllenhaal, who replaced Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes, she approached the role as the crucial emotional connection point between Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent.
She's the catalyst of loss. She serves as the emotional grounding for both men, and her death is the tragic event that fuels Bruce's continuation as Batman and Dent's complete collapse.
Let's pivot now to the technical innovations, because this film was a seismic event in production quality.
Largely due to Christopher Nolan's insistence on using practical filmmaking wherever humanly possible. This approach dictated the feel and scope of the entire picture.
And the integration of IMAX technology was truly unprecedented for a major motion picture.
Yeah, IMAX had typically been reserved for nature documentaries or maybe very brief set pieces. But The Dark Knight was the first blockbuster to incorporate high-resolution IMAX cameras for significant narrative-driving portions of the film.
It was a massive commitment, a logistical nightmare, really.
Of the film's 152-minute running time, approximately 28 minutes, a full 15 to 20% featured IMAX footage.
That means critical dialogue scenes, massive action sequences, and the opening prologue were all shot in this enormous, unforgiving format.
Nolan used the IMAX format right away, starting with that bank heist prologue, explicitly to convey the difference in scale and ambition compared to Batman Begins.
This was not easy. The cameras themselves were famously large, heavy, and extremely unwieldy.
And the specialized 70mm film stock cost up to 4 times as much as traditional 35mm film.
Warner Bros. Was understandably reluctant, but Nolan was determined.
His cinematographer, Wally Feaster, and the camera crew had to undergo extensive specialized training in early 2007 just to make shooting with these behemoths feasible on a tight schedule.
And you have to remember the complexity this added to the soundscape.
Right. Nolan preferred to capture sound live on set, but the IMAX cameras are notoriously loud.
So Feaster and the sound crew had to constantly employ mitigating strategies, like insulating the cameras or placing them far away, just to capture the required dialogue without having to resort to excessive dubbing later.
Beyond the camera work, Nolan prioritized practical effects and live stunts.
He only employed computer-generated imagery when it was absolutely unavoidable, like digitally erasing wires during a stunt.
The sources confirm the film used over 700 digital effects shots, but they stress that Nolan was constantly pushing for physical reality to anchor the drama.
The most famous and just jaw-dropping example of this commitment to practical filmmaking is the truck flip.
That stunt involved flipping an entire 18-wheel tractor trailer on LaSalle Street in Chicago.
They shot there for 3 weeks, even shutting down parts of the multi-level Wacker Drive overnight.
And they achieved the flip using hydraulic pistons placed beneath the truck, triggered precisely to send it rotating end over end, in camera.
That kind of meticulous in-camera stunt work is what grounds the fantasy. And we also have the Bat Pod.
The Batcycle, which was a functional physical vehicle built by the effects team, not fully computer-generated.
Its design was truly unique, unwieldy, with these massive, wide tires and unconventional steering.
The design was so demanding that only a single stuntman, Jean-Pierre Goy, could ride it effectively after months of rigorous specialized training.
It really highlights that the commitment to reality extended into these huge engineering challenges.
I remember critics at the time arguing that the Batpod, despite being practical, actually looked more like a fantastical CGI creation because of its extreme design.
We must pause here to reflect on the tragic cost of this commitment to high-stakes stunt work.
The film includes a dedication to stuntman Conway Wycliffe, who died during a rehearsal for a Tumbler or Batmobile stunt in the UK.
It's a very sobering reminder of the danger and the professionalism required to create these spectacular sequences.
The character aesthetics were equally specific and grounded in real-world influences. Lindy Hemming, the designer, based the Joker's visual appearance on some unsettling artistic influences.
Specifically, the sources mention the 1953 painting study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X by Francis Bacon.
That Bacon influence is fascinating. It captures the idea of a figure trapped in an internal scream, which perfectly matches the Joker's manic intensity.
And the makeup process also leaned heavily into realism. The prosthetic supervisor created the Joker's scars to look painful and crude, not theatrical.
And John Caglione Jr. designed the makeup application to be organic. It was intentionally applied to look worn, dirty, smeared, cracked.
As though it had been on for days, never washed off, reflecting the character living in a constant state of chaos.
A key detail is that Heath Ledger personally applied his own lipstick. He considered that specific act essential to his daily characterization ritual.
Moving to the soundscape, which brilliantly defined the characters. Composers James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer returned from Batman Begins.
And they deliberately separated their duties. Howard focused on Dent, creating music that captured his American idealism before warping the brass sounds upon his corruption.
And Zimmer took on Batman and the Joker. For the Joker's theme, Zimmer aimed for a distinct punk influence.
He famously used just 2 escalating notes that climb in pitch and volume to create agitation. He drew influence from electronic music innovators like Kraftwerk.
He used synthesizers, modified notes to emulate sounds like thunder and razors.
And even instructed orchestra musicians to perform techniques opposite to their training, like gradually shifting between the 2 notes over 3 minutes to create this unsettling, chaotic result.
That detailed sound design is what makes the Joker's presence so unsettling, whether you see him or not.
And this complex score, much like the final editing process, became an unintentional memorial. Zimmer considered discarding the theme after Ledger's death.
But he opted to keep it, feeling it was the purest way to memorialize the intensity of his performance.
Let's move into the analytical heart of the film, the moral complexity and the profound themes it grapples with.
Starting again with the consequence of vigilantism and escalation.
Batman's actions provoke the Joker. It proves the cyclical nature of the struggle. It's not a solvable problem, but a self-perpetuating one.
Batman thought his war on crime would be temporary. The Joker proves that exceptional force generates exceptional opposition.
And furthermore, the sources point out the unintended side effects of Batman's vigilante role,
His presence encourages these lower-level, often ill-equipped copycat vigilantes.
which paradoxically escalates lawlessness and chaos even further. This forces Batman to constantly assert his authority over others who lack his capabilities.
Reaffirming the exceptionality of his self-given role, which is an inherently unstable form of governance.
The film has been widely analyzed as a direct analogy for the ethical compromises that occurred during the War on Terror.
And the often terrifying consequences of government and civil authorities abandoning established rules to combat lawlessness.
The Joker is interpreted by many critics as symbolizing the unknowable face of modern terrorism. He lacks a clear political ideology, but causes chaos and widespread fear for its own sake.
His reliance on video threats, mass hostage situations, and random acts of destruction resonated deeply with the contemporary audience's anxiety in the post-9/11 world.
And this brings us directly to the film's unflinching examination of the ethical boundary, Batman's invasive surveillance network.
To find the Joker, Batman co-opts the cell phones of Gotham's entire citizenry.
Essentially turning every phone into a microphone and a sonar tracker, fundamentally violating their privacy and civil liberties.
The sources directly compare this massive violation of civil liberties to the debates around the Patriot Act in 2001.
The question the film poses is whether this violation is justified if it stops absolute chaos.
The internal ethical response is powerfully embodied by Lucius Fox.
He views this surveillance capability as crossing a critical, non-negotiable ethical line. He explicitly threatens to quit if the technology remains active,
Stating that this level of power is too much for any single person to wield, regardless of their intentions.
And while Batman does ultimately destroy the technology, ensuring it never falls into the wrong hands,
The film illustrates a stark, pragmatic reality. He needed this gross violation of civil liberties to succeed.
and this raises a profound and disturbing question for you, the audience. Were those necessary evils truly necessary? And at what cost of freedom do you fight for security?
The film is equally concerned with the corrosion of ideals embodied by Harvey Dent.
He starts as Gotham's White Knight, a symbol of goodness who operates strictly within the legal framework, hoping to let Batman retire.
But the Joker targets him explicitly to prove his ideological point, that even symbols of goodness can be broken down to their base, selfish components.
The Joker challenges the moral code of civilized people, arguing they're only as good as the world allows them to be. When things go wrong, he says, they'll eat each other.
And Dent, subjected to the trauma of Rachel Dawes' death and his own disfigurement, falls completely.
This transition is perfectly reflected in his reliance on his famous coin.
His two-headed coin starts as a mechanism to eliminate bias, a controlled symbol of chance where he controls the outcome.
But after his transformation into Two-Face, the coin is scarred on one side, introducing true random chance and nihilism into his decisions.
He submits his decisions entirely to this scarred coin, seeing the unpredictable result as unbiased, unprejudiced, fair.
His new form of justice is entirely trauma-driven, abandoning his faith in law for the tyranny of random luck.
The Joker himself represents that pure ideological deviancy. Academic sources often compare him to Nietzsche's Superman, the Übermensch.
A figure who exists outside of traditional moral definitions of good and evil, creating his own values by smashing established ones.
He seeks no personal gain. He just wants to shatter systems and force people to make agonizing moral decisions.
He demonstrates his ethos that everything burns by setting a towering pile of cash on fire, an act that confuses the mob bosses who only understand monetary value.
But it perfectly encapsulates the Joker's nihilistic creed. He's the same person, with or without makeup, with nothing to hide and nothing to lose.
That's the ideological stakes of the conflict. However, the Joker is ultimately defeated not by Batman's physical strength or even his strategy,
But by a collective moral choice made by the populace.
that scene on the ferries is crucial. The passengers on the two boats, one with civilians and the other with prisoners, refuse to kill one another to save themselves.
This communal act of compassion, despite the intense pressure and fear, demonstrates that humanity is not inherently corruptible.
It proves the Joker's central ideology wrong, at least for one night.
Yet the moral compromises don't end there, and this leads us to the film's controversial ending.
Batman is forced to push Dent to his death to save Commissioner Gordon's son, breaking Batman's fundamental rule against killing.
He then chooses to accept the blame for Dent's actions to preserve Dent as a symbol of Hope Gotham's uncorrupted hero, the famous noble lie.
This complex act, where Batman takes on dense sins and becomes a symbol of criminality to save the city's spirit, is viewed by many critics as profoundly heroic.
A kind of Christ-like sacrifice, where he leaves himself hunted and despised to maintain the public's faith in goodness.
But wait, so what's the counter-argument? Where does the cynical interpretation come from?
The opposing critical viewpoint views the noble lie as a dangerous endorsement of deception, perhaps even a form of elitist manipulation.
In that reading, a minority Batman and Gordon decide that manipulating the truth, hiding the brutal facts from the public, is necessary for the greater good.
Which raises the question of whether heroes have the right to curate public perception to that degree. It suggests a totalitarian undertone.
It is a profound, messy sacrifice, and it's compounded by the private actions of Alfred,
Who engages in his own noble lie. Alfred burns Rachel's undelivered letter that confirmed she had chosen Dent over Bruce Wayne.
sparing Bruce the crushing emotional trauma of that final rejection. It was an act of private, compassionate deception.
Unseen, personal, and yet equally manipulative of the truth. Undertaken to sustain the public myth of the hero by protecting the man underneath from utter devastation.
Moving to the film's lasting legacy, the financial performance alone was monumental.
The Dark Knight earned over $1 billion worldwide, following re-releases. It was the highest-grossing film of 2008.
And it stands as the first superhero film ever to surpass the billion-dollar mark globally. It cemented the financial viability of the serious, complex comic book adaptation.
Critically, the impact was immediate and long-lasting. The Dark Knight is frequently cited as one of the greatest superhero films ever made.
Often placed in the same conversation as prestige dramas. Critics noted that it redefined the genre by blending comic book tropes with real-world, mature events and intense psychological character studies.
It undeniably became a blueprint for modern superhero cinema, prompting a surge in films attempting a tonally dark, gritty, and realistic approach.
Its success legitimized the genre with film studios, shifting comic book adaptations from niche projects to a central focus of annual studio strategies.
However, the sources also point out a crucial failure among imitators.
Yes, many filmmakers and studios took the wrong lesson, mistaking the dark, gritty tone for narrative depth and intelligent writing.
The Dark Knight succeeded because it combined that tone with profound narrative depth and complex philosophical themes.
Something that was rarely replicated effectively afterward.
The film also had a profound structural impact on the Academy Awards, a phenomenon referred to in the industry as the Dark Knight rule.
Yes, the film's critical success was huge. It won major awards from critics groups and performed strongly in other Oscar categories.
But its surprising absence from the Best Picture nomination list at the 81st Academy Awards was widely criticized as a significant snub.
The argument was that the Academy still retained an inherent bias against genre films, regardless of their quality or impact.
That industry backlash, fueled by critics and audiences alike, directly resulted in the Academy expanding the limit for Best Picture nominees from 5 to 10.
Starting the very next year. This was a structural change designed explicitly to allow critically respected yet broadly popular films, including big-budget blockbusters, to gain recognition.
This rule fundamentally changed the Oscars.
And Heath Ledger's enduring triumph is a core part of that legacy. His posthumous win for Best Supporting Actor was monumental.
It made him only the second actor in history to achieve this, following Peter Finch, and it marked the first time a comic book adaptation won an Academy Acting Award.
His performance garnered near-unanimous praise for its unsettling realism and terrifying conviction.
His Joker is consistently ranked by critics and industry professionals as one of the greatest cinematic villains, often placed second only to Darth Vader.
The Dark Knight taught filmmakers that comic book characters are malleable. They can be grounded, prestigious, and character-driven all at once.
Finally, let's look at the sheer cultural penetration of the film.
Certain scenes and lines immediately entered the popular lexicon and are instantly recognizable a decade and a half later.
The famous pencil trick scene, where the Joker performs a gruesome demonstration of speed and malice, is noted as one of the most iconic and highly famous moments in cinema history.
It just cemented the Joker's capacity for spontaneous, brutal violence.
And then there is the indelible dialogue. Harvey Dent's profound, fatalistic phrase, "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain."
That became a defining cultural reference, quoted constantly to describe political and personal downfall.
And that's matched by Alfred's line, spoken to Bruce Wayne, describing the Joker's lack of motive. "Some men just want to watch the world burn."
These quotes caption universal truths about morality and chaos that transcended the superhero context.
Its real-world resonance extended surprisingly far into the political sphere.
U.S. President Barack Obama, in explaining the chaos caused by the growth of the Islamic State group, referenced the Joker's pure ideological chaos.
He said the traditional gangs of Gotham had a kind of order, but the Joker comes in and lights the whole city on fire, highlighting the difficulty of fighting an enemy motivated purely by destruction.
So, we've covered the core ideas presented. The film's revolutionary impact on realism in superhero cinema, its masterful integration of practical filmmaking, and its unflinching exploration of morality and the terrible ethics required to fight pure chaos.
We established that Batman took the public blame for dense crimes to maintain Gotham's hope in an uncorrupted hero. That was the central noble lie the city embraced, a public compromise of truth for stability.
However, we also discussed the private compromise. Alfred protected Bruce Wayne from the emotional trauma of Rachel choosing Dent by burning her final letter.
An act that was unseen, personal, and yet equally manipulative of the truth.
So as we conclude this exploration, consider this provocative question for you to think about. We've established that the public noble lie is often debated as either heroic or cynical deception. But how does this hidden, compassionate deception by Alfred, a lie of protection, not policy, complicate the entire argument?
What are the quiet, private compromises unseen by the public that are necessary to sustain a public myth? And does Alfred's deeply loyal private deception make his act equally, or perhaps even more, necessary and heroic than Batman's public sacrifice?
Thanks for listening.